Hello, welcome to this weekend's reading vlog. I'm on the floor next to the cats. They've decided that this cardboard box is their favorite place to rest. I am excited to jump into this week's read. I am giving a chance to an author I actually have not had the world's best experiences with in the past, and that is Rebecca Ross. I'm going to be reading Wild Reverence, which is her new release from this past year. I have heard so many wonderful things about this book. It is a lyrical and mythical romantasy story that has a lot less of the physical romance and leans a lot more into the yearning and tension. I'm looking forward to this, but the reason that I have some trepidation is that I read her other series, which was Divine Rivals, and I don't remember the name of the second book, but I read both of those. I read them on audio, which may have impacted my experience, but I found it just not that great. I don't know. I don't know if I just didn't buy into the romance with the characters. I just wasn't obsessed with it. There is only one comparison that really could have brought me back, because these books are all long, and to find them kind of meh, there are a lot of authors that I would like to check out that I maybe would have given this time to. But there was one comparison that people kept making about this book that brought me back, which is that everybody keeps saying that the writing in this is very similar to Juliette Marillier. I love Juliette Marillier. I have been obsessed with her Seven Waters series. I've read the first two books and I kind of treat myself to one every spring. Sentence to sentence, it's just gorgeous. So I'm intrigued by this. I'm willing to give Rebecca Ross another chance since Juliette Marillier really is that girl. And if people are thinking that the romance in this plays out like the Seven Waters romances, then I'm willing to give it a shot. For those who don't know, Wild Reverence is a story about a young goddess named Matilda. She is not particularly powerful, which is actually kind of a relief since it's a very cutthroat world of gods, and they apparently, in the very first pages of the book, there's an introduction to all of the characters. And there's a little asterisk next to some of the gods indicating the types of magic that they've stolen from other gods. So there is a god, for instance, of winter, fire, and cunning, and she stole fire and cunning from some other god that is now dead. So Matilda is not very powerful, but that might be protective for her in this world of cutthroat gods, and she apparently starts dreaming about a mortal boy, and their paths kind of cross and go from there. I'm intrigued by this. I'm willing to give it a chance. And the dramatis personae introduction in the beginning already seemed pretty interesting. So we're off to a good start. I am in the middle of my work from home work day though, so I'm gonna have to crack away a little bit longer at different projects for work before I can dive into this evening. I'm headed out on a walk here in a minute, but I wanted to take a moment to talk about one of my favorite pieces of writing that I've read recently, which was a poem written by Renee Good, the woman who was just murdered in Minneapolis by ICE agents. We talk a lot about reading as escapism, and I think that that's really true, and it has its place right now. But Renee's work also reminds me about the power of writing to make me feel deeply, think deeply, and connect deeply with other people. She was obviously a very talented writer, and her poem has a special resonance, unfortunately, now because of the way that she was martyred in the cause of keeping her neighbors safe. I'm thinking a lot about her family, her wife, and her children right now, and I'm also thinking about the number of people who don't get the news coverage that Renee got, who are also being victimized by ICE agents at this moment. This is a really scary time to be a person in the United States, and it can make you want to stay inside and just look after yourself. But we're all called right now to go out and look after one another. In memory of Renee, I really encourage you to look for ways to take care of your neighbors right now, and to find ways to peacefully but forcefully push back against what's going on in this country. I've put some resources in this video's bio, and I know that I'll be looking for those opportunities and taking advantage of them as well. The workday is over. I have dried my wet bangs after my walk, and I have read a cool 80 pages of Wild Reverence. The writing style is elevated from Divine Rivals, and I am enjoying it. It actually reminds me a bit more of Madeline Miller. She wrote Circe and Song of Achilles. It has a bit more detachment than what I think of typically for Juliette Marillier, and I think part of it is because this narrative so far has centered a lot around gods, which are kind of mercurial characters. They have kind of an ethereal and detached style of narrative that is different from humans, and I think does make it distinct. Juliette Marillier's writing does touch on different styles of magic and fairy tale creatures, but it has a lot less to do with gods, and I think that capriciousness is more like Madeline Miller, which is fine. I love Madeline Miller. There are a few chinks in the armor though. For instance, sometimes Rebecca Ross will kind of insinuate something and then immediately restate it. So she'll be like, the matriarch of the gods paused while reading my fate in the stars. And then like 4 paragraphs later, she'll be like, she did see something strange in my stars. I'm like, yes, we got it. We got it. Don't worry. You don't have to feed it to me. So that kind of thing can get a little bit annoying, but there are definitely some strengths to this. I am liking Matilda, our main character. I do think Matilda is not the godliest name we could have picked, but Matilda herself is not the godliest of the gods, so that's fair. She is forming alliances, forming her own kind of, she's still very young and she's forming her own opinions of love and love as a weakness. That's really interesting. There was a scene where she exhibited some fear of mortal men that I found really interesting, kind of setting her power and her immortality up against kind of the brutality of mortal man. Was a really interesting choice, I thought. We have not spent much time in the head of Vincent, her love interest so far. Again, they're both still children. They've encountered each other like once in sort of an interesting way, but I'm expecting that love story to become very pivotal and to really anchor this plot. So I think a lot of my overall opinion of this book is going to come down to whether I'm convinced and entertained by that love story. So we'll see. 80 pages down, some of my fears about Rebecca Ross's writing style stay true, but I am enjoying her writing style more in this book than I have in the past, and that's not nothing, so I'll let you know how it goes. Well, hello! Welcome to my reading nook. This has been a hallmark of my reading experience since I was very young. This was a Christmas present when I was like 8 years old, and I think I've read more books here than anywhere else. Maybe at this point I've listened to more audiobooks in my car, but this chair and I go way back. I have continued reading Divine Rivals. I am now on page 141, so I'm on the second section, and it's picking up. There have been some really dramatic plot twists that have definitely caught my interest. I do feel like we are getting a lot more of Matilda's perspective in this book. I would be curious to hear what other people think. I have heard a lot of discourse recently about male POV in romance stories and whether it's necessary, whether it kills the yearning, whether it's enjoyable. I find it very dependent on which man I'm spending time with. I can kind of see where people are coming from with the male perspective kind of killing some of the yearning or killing some of the curiosity, because in real romance, part of the excitement is that you have no idea what the other person is thinking, and so it does kill it a little bit to know what the man is thinking. We have Vincent's perspective sort of sprinkled in here, which is an interesting approach. It might get some of that best of both worlds where we get to know both of the characters pretty well, but there is still much more of Matilda's perspective and what she's thinking, and so there's still some mystery to Vincent. I am finding that, just as in the Divine Rivals series, I am not super convinced by Vincent. He feels pretty two-dimensional, just kind of like a boy who exists so that we can have a romance so far, but we're not super far in, so I'm willing to give it the benefit of the doubt. We have continued with that sort of mythic narrative distance from the story. I feel almost like everything that's happening is inevitable or happened hundreds of years ago and is being recounted. We are definitely getting into the meat of the plot. There have been some dramatic betrayals and twists and turns that have captured my interest. So I am going to keep reading right now, and we'll catch up again in a little bit. One other thing with this book really quickly is that I feel like we have a really interesting relationship with time. Obviously, Matilda is a god, and so she has immortality and she experiences time a little bit differently, but she's also a very young god, so it almost feels like she is a child at the same time that Vincent the human is a child, and then she grows up within the same time jump that he does. And so she is a god, and there is some aspects to the story that follow a much longer godly timeline. And then at the same time, we're making these time jumps that would be very minimal to a god that are massive for her. I wonder if it's because of her youth, and I wonder if that's going to come into play in this narrative as well, because obviously time is a big component when you are an immortal falling in love with a mortal, and I'm curious when her perspective on time is going to catch up with the other gods. That was just an interesting tidbit I wanted to touch on. I'm going back in. We just finished watching People We Meet on Vacation, which was very cute. I recommend it. I'm a big Emily Henry fan as like a beach read or a summer romance, and that's the first one I ever read. It was a couple years ago, so I had forgotten a lot about the plot, but I thought they did a really cute job translating it to the screen. And I also got a lot of progress done on the sleeve. On the sleeve of my Salty Day sweater. I originally thought I was going to talk a lot more about knitting, and I just haven't been doing very much of it lately, but this is my Salty Day sweater. I've got the whole body done. I have to knit the neck hole, and obviously this whole armhole is missing its sleeve, but this sleeve is coming along nicely. I am playing a little bit of yarn chicken, which is when you think you're probably going to run out of yarn before you finish your project. I've got this much of my regular yarn left, and I still have 2 sleeves in the neck to do, so I'm getting a little nervous, but that's the progress for tonight. Okay, it's like literally midnight, and I just realized that if I want to make these little egg cup things for Caden to bring to work tomorrow, that means doing it right now. So let's get these done fast. And now it's time to go to bed. Hello, it is now Tuesday. I have done a terrible job of vlogging the last couple of days. On Sunday, it ended up being really busy. My mom and I printed all of the save the date lino cuts for my wedding. I will put a little video up of it here and try to blur out obviously some of that more personal information, but that was a really fun and kind of time-consuming process, and we have those all ready to go. And then yesterday after work, I did not do the chores I was supposed to do. I didn't do the workout I was supposed to do. I'm sure if you ask the cats, I did not do right by them in terms of the amount of playtime that I did, and I didn't vlog at all. But what I did do was read about 200 pages of Divine Rivals. So I am now on page 400, and I think we're coming up on the home stretch of this. It is very compulsively readable. Every time I pick this up, I really have a hard time putting it down. I actually started reading it right after work yesterday and realized at around 8:30 that I needed to do some other things for the day. I am really enjoying this a lot over my experience with the Divine Rivals series. I wonder if it is because it's text rather than audio, but I also think that the writing style, again, is very different for this one. I maybe wouldn't put this on the level of a Marillier, but it is really, really good. We're 400 pages in. We are still yearning. The yearning is intense. I hope that that's not a spoiler, but I think that is something that we knew about this book, was that it was going to be not necessarily a slow burn. I think both of our characters have had strong feelings for a long time, and there was never any rivalry or ill will, really. But There are a number of circumstances that have kept us apart. There are some personal reticences that have kept us apart. Sometimes we're together, and those scenes have been lovely. There were also a couple of things I wanted to note about this book that I'm really enjoying. One of them is the magical items. Rebecca Ross did a wonderful job of having very inventive magical items that kind of flesh out this fantasy world in a way that I feel like we would otherwise be lacking. They're well illustrated. I feel like I can picture and almost even hold these objects in my hand. That was something. The typewriters in the Divine Rival series were also a really interesting and inventive magical object. So that is definitely a strength of hers. There are a couple of things that we are definitely still waiting to come up that are like adding to the drama and the suspense. We've got about 100 pages left, and I know somebody's going to call in this favor, or something that was mentioned a couple hundred pages ago still has to be resolved. That has helped to propel me through a 500-page book, which otherwise I feel like is a little bit long for a romance. I think we're headed toward maybe a 4-star. I wouldn't give this a 5-star as of yet unless it really knocks my socks off in the ending, but a 4-star for sure seems guaranteed. I'm really enjoying this, and I have been flying through it relative to the responsibilities that I maybe should have been taking care of instead. So we're heading into the afternoon. I'm gonna read a bit more, and then we'll see where we go from there. Thought I was going to make soup. I have none of the ingredients I need to make soup, so I made chickpeas and like a curry rice situation. And so I'm gonna eat that quick and get back to reading. Okay, this is my final attempt to record my review. I tried a couple times at home and the cats were just being super loud. The lighting was terrible. We're gonna give it another shot to close out this vlog. I do think that this book was a solid 4-star for me. Really earned those 4 stars. I loved the long romantic build-up, the intensity of the feelings, the longing. There was a really interesting fantasy world in this. Instead of relying on the mythos of other cultures or worlds like the Greek myths in Madeline Miller or Irish mythology for Juliette Marillier, Rebecca Ross gets all the points for creating a really interesting new mythology system and new set of gods that were actually a little bit more vulnerable and maybe more interesting for it. There was a really lovely dynamic where in a heterosexual couple, the woman was more powerful in this instance. Matilda had a lot more might and power and information than Vincent did, and I found that really refreshing, and the way that both of them handled it was really refreshing and flattering to them. Every time I picked it up, I found myself reading at least 50 pages in one go. So 4 stars, solid read, very enjoyable. I'm talking a star for 2 reasons. The first is that while the writing style in this was lyrical, beautiful, vivid, went into the 4-star category, every once in a while she would hit almost like a wrong note on the keyboard and like mess up the melody a little bit. There were a couple of sentences that were over-explaining. There were a couple of like phrases or word choices that I didn't love that would slightly send me out of the text. I think this is just her trying a new writing style and maybe still working out the kinks of it. But that took me a little bit out of it. And the second thing is that Vincent was not as fully fleshed out and complex as some of the male romantic leads that I've really enjoyed in the past. He was okay. There's nothing wrong with him. He was a good guy, but there wasn't really anything that interesting about him. There was definitely enough tragic backstory to dive into and to give him some depth, and I felt like we never really got there. We only ever got fragments of his perspective, and the entire time we were in his perspective, he was just doing basically what you would predict a good guy to do. So there was never any real surprises. It was just, you know, he was okay. Either way, I really enjoyed this read, and thank you so much for spending that time with me. Like I said, I've put some links below if you are also thinking a lot outside of your reading time or during your reading time about taking care of your neighbors, about the current state of affairs and what we can do about it. And so if you are interested in checking those out, I would love to see you down there, and I will be back with another video soon.